Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this important piece of legislation before the committee today, H.R. 5923, the Walnut Grove Land Exchange Act. Mr. Chairman, where I live epitomizes rural America. My district is quite large. It's 33 of the 75 counties in Arkansas, and the Walnut Grove Community Church exemplifies I think life in rural Arkansas and all across rural America. Mr. Chairman, I think a lot of people don't understand that in these rural communities, these churches not only serve as houses of worship, but many times they're the only building for miles in a community, and that's the case here with Walnut Grove. They have regular worship services. They also have weddings, they have funerals, they have community gatherings. The church has even served as a command post during a time of natural disaster before, and also during search and rescue. So these churches are very important for the spiritual well-being of these communities, but also they serve a very practical purpose. And I'm a little bit shocked that we're actually having to have a hearing to exchange 4 acres that the church sits on, that's currently owned by the Forest Service, for 6 acres that's adjacent to the Forest Service that's usable. But here we are, and I'm glad we're here today because this is important to me, and it's important to residents in North Garland County, Arkansas. This bill is also important enough that both senators from Arkansas, Senator Cotton and Senator Bozeman, introduced the exact same legislation in the Senate today. It's a shame that we couldn't have just made this trade with the Forest Service without having to have an act of Congress. But the church has been working on this diligently for over 20 years. And if you examine the record, the cemetery where this church exists actually has grave markers that are 3 decades older than the Forest Service, so there's no question as to who was there first. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing. I would like to recognize a witness today, Trey Bassett, who is a member of Walnut Grove Community Church. Trey's a friend, and he's worked on this issue for, like I said, 20 plus years. He resides in Jessieville, Arkansas, which is probably about 10 or 15 miles away from the church. That's what rural Arkansas is like. He's a deacon in the church, and he's also a treasurer of the church. Just to show how important this is to the community, and to the rural residents of North Garland County, Trey took off work, hopped in his car, and drove 16 hours just to be with us today. And I trust that his testimony will be well worth the effort that he and so many have put into making this happen. And I yield back.
Chair is now pleased to introduce Mr. George Joseph Bassett III, Deacon and Treasurer of Walnut Grove Community Church from Jessieville, Arkansas. Welcome.
Thank you. Chairman McClintock, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is George Joseph Bassett III, but everyone knows me as Trey. I am a deacon, the treasurer at the Walnut Grove Community Church. Our church is located off of Highway 298 in Jessieville, Arkansas, inside the Ouachita National Forest. I am here today to talk about H.R. 5923, the Walnut Grove Land Exchange Act. I've been attending Walnut Grove Church since the fall of 1997. I was ordained as a deacon in 2011 and became church treasurer in 2013. My wife Janice and my 3 daughters, Lexi, Harley, and Presley, are also members of the church. Janice is a church secretary and a Sunday school teacher, and is the 4th generation member of our church. Janice's grandparents, John and Effie Johnson, and Jim and Rosetta Teal, were among those involved in the relocation of the church in 1938 to its present-day location within the National Forest. Our church attendance averages 80 to 100 weekly, which may not sound like much for a small church in rural Arkansas. We are pleased with the growth in attendance over the last 8+ years. Our growing numbers is one of the reasons I'm in front of you today. Arminda and Clorinda Riley, why are these names important? They are the oldest legible headstones in the cemetery. Why bring this up? These 2 sites were the foundation of our cemetery approximately 34 years before the establishment of the United States Forest Service. Walnut Grove Rock Springs Cemetery is incredibly important to both our church and the surrounding community. Along with numerous servicemen laid to rest, there are cemeteries where we honor our sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and other congregational members who have passed on. In 1938, Walnut Grove Community Church was moved approximately a mile to its present-day location within the Jessieville National Forest to be closer to the cemetery. The first services in the church was held in 1939, sadly a funeral service for a newborn infant of Mary and Irvin Teal. Since that service nearly 80 years ago, our church has hosted community meetings, served as search and rescue command post, and more. We have had hundreds of weddings, including my own, along with baptisms, baby dedications, and funerals. This is my hope with passage of H.R. 5923 that one day my daughters can also have their weddings at Walnut Grove, and the church can continue to serve our community for generations to come. Now that you know some of the history of our church, I would like to discuss the issues fixed by H.R. 5923. For all the history within the doors and preserved in our adjacent cemetery, we do not own the land we worship on. The cemetery and the land of the church itself is federal property. From the onset, the church operated under a Forest Service special use permit allowing the congregation to worship on the provided. In exchange, we upkeep the maintenance of the cemetery. When the use permit expired in 2000, we attempted to purchase the property from the Forest Service, but did not reach an agreement. We then signed a new special use permit instituting a yearly fee which currently paid to worship in our church. The special use permit requires a yearly renewal with the Forest Service and is authorized to which has authority to increase the rates or simply not renew the permit if they choose. However unlikely, it is within the Forest Service power to walk away from the permit for any reason, essentially evicting us. In 2004, 6 acres of land was donated to the church by one of our members, William Johnson. Mr. Johnson was a World War II POW and is buried in the cemetery, donated land upon passing for the sole purpose of facilitating a land exchange with the Forest Service. We approached the Forest Service, they declined. In 2006, we tried again with the help of former Representative Mike Ross, but was also unsuccessful. At the time, the Forest Service told us if we took over paying special use permit fees for the cemetery in addition to the fees for the church, it would be easier to complete the land trade. In 2007, we did so, paying both fees for the church and for the cemetery, but the Forest Service again declined the trade. Several additional attempts to facilitate an exchange have been made between 2008 and 2016 with no results. At the end of 2016, I contacted Congressman Westerman about a solution. Through hard work, Congressman Westerman and his staff have gotten us here today, as I sit before you asking for a swift passage of H.R. 5923. As I stated in the beginning, with an average attendance of 100 people, we are outgrowing our 80-year-old building and need more classroom places and places for youth to gather in a protective and positive environment. With current ownership, we are not able to make any needed improvements to our property, building, parking areas, as any alterations require permission from the Forest Service. Through the last 20-plus years, we, our congregation, have tried to go through the proper channels to do everything we have been asked to do to make this land trade a reality, but with no result. This bill is the closest we have gotten to finally acquiring the land. In conclusion, I hope this information helps the positive decision for the church and the congregation. The church understands its responsibilities in the process and willing to do whatever is necessary to complete the transaction. I want to thank Congressman Westerman and his staff for the time and the energy they have put into this bill, and I want to thank the committee for taking the time to listen. I hope this testimony and any questions you have following helps the Walnut Grove Community Church serve its people of Jessieville for years to come. Thank you.
All right, so let me get this right. This is an 80-year-old church with a cemetery that predates the formation of the Forest Service. You built the buildings, you maintained the buildings and the cemetery, and yet you have to ask for continuing permission from the Forest Service to renew an annual permit, and any improvements to your property also have to go through the Forest Service bureaucracy simply because they own the land on which your facilities sit. Is that essentially the situation?
Yes, sir. We maintain the building and the land that the church sits on, and the cemetery itself.
And the church owns 6 acres elsewhere that it is proposing to exchange for the 4 acres the church has occupied for the last 80 years.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry you have had to go through all of this, but hopefully that it can be resolved with this legislation. Any questions? Mr. Westerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you pretty well summed it up there, but I did want to ask Trey to clarify, what sort of improvements are you barred from doing on your property while the Forest Service owns it? And would you have to get the Forest Service to do a timber sale on a tree you'd like to clear?
Yeah, what we're wanting to do is we're at the point we're outgrowing our original facility. We need more classrooms. We need more room for fellowship days, different things we have, and we're not allowed to do any alterations to the building. I have asked if we, tore down the existing building and went back in the same exact footprint of that building, and we were told that that would be infringing on federal land. So we can't do anything to the buildings. If we tear down, it has to stay down, and the areas of our parking are covered with trees. So in order for us to remove any trees or do any to make parking easier, we would have to go through the Forest Service as a timber sale to remove any of the big cedar trees that are on the property.
And would you just state again how long you've been trying to purchase or exchange the land with the Forest Service, and clarify, have they been straightforward with you during that time?
I started this knowing about this process in '97. Marinelle Robertson actually started a process before that date, but she couldn't remember when exactly that process started, so it was before '97. And for the most part, they haven't been straightforward with us exactly. We would question and ask if we could do this, and it would be a 6, 8, 10-month process. We'd call back, and they'd say we can't do it. So, it's just a matter of, to us, it feels like that they just don't want to take the time to fool with such a small land exchange, that they just kind of put us off until we kind of forget about it, until we bring it up the next time.
So you think it's just a small matter to the Forest Service is why they seem to have given you a hard time, because they actually seem to benefit from the land swap, and plus they've been very cooperative with our office. And
I think from what I understand and what I've been told by people outside that have dealt with land trades before, that it's such a small parcel of land that, the paperwork is more than what the trade is worth. So I think that's kind of why we haven't had any progress moving forward with it. Personally, I think that's what
it may be small to the Forest Service, but I want to note that it's very big to the community and those people who are involved. Now yield back, Mr. Chairman.